Alexander the Great, Conquests and Legacy of a Timeless King. Chapter 1. The Birth of a Legend, Early Life and Education. My son, seek out victories worthy of yourself. King Philip II to Alexander. In the summer of 356 BCE, in the capital city of Pella, the royal palace of Macedonia bustled with excitement and foreboding. A violent thunderstorm raged across the skies, and at its height a messenger burst into the chamber of King Philip II to announce two historic events. His general Parmenion had just triumphed over the Illyrians, and more importantly, Queen Olympias had given birth to a son. That child, born amidst fire and lightning, would one day change the course of human history. His name was Alexander. From the moment of his birth, Alexander was surrounded by omens, legends, and expectations. Olympias, a strong-willed woman of Epirot royal blood, claimed descent from Achilles and raised her son to believe he was born of destiny. According to legend, on the night of his conception, Olympias dreamed that a thunderbolt struck her womb, setting it ablaze, a divine sign that the child she bore was not entirely of this world. King Philip, a cunning and ambitious monarch who had transformed the once fractured Macedonian kingdom into a military powerhouse, took immense pride in the birth of his heir. Though he had other sons, none would rival Alexander in spirit, intellect, or ambition. From an early age, Alexander was treated not as a boy, but as a prince destined for greatness. The education of a conqueror. As Alexander grew, it became evident that he was no ordinary child. He had an insatiable curiosity, a fiery temper, and a natural command over others. Recognizing the boy's extraordinary potential, Philip sought the best tutors in the land. At first, Alexander was taught by Leonidas, a stern relative of Olympias, who instilled in him the virtues of Spartan discipline and austerity. The boy was trained in music, poetry, hunting, and military tactics. But the true transformation of Alexander's mind began when Philip hired Aristotle, the great philosopher and student of Plato, to tutor his son. For 3 years, beginning when Alexander was around 13, Aristotle taught him at the Temple of the Nymphs in Mieza. Aristotle's influence would last a lifetime. Under his guidance, Alexander studied ethics, politics, logic, biology, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. He was introduced to Homer's Iliad, which would become his favorite book. He carried a copy with him during all his campaigns, said to be annotated in the philosopher's own hand. Aristotle didn't just teach Alexander facts, he taught him how to think. He filled the young prince's mind with the idea that man could achieve greatness through reason, virtue, and action. He also instilled in him a sense of cultural superiority, convincing Alexander of the Hellenic mission to civilize the barbarian East, the shadow of Achilles. From childhood, Alexander modeled himself after Achilles, the mythical Greek hero of the Trojan War. Olympias reinforced this image constantly, even claiming that Alexander was descended from Achilles through her lineage. Alexander would emulate Achilles' valor, loyalty, and tragic passion throughout his life. He practiced swordsmanship and horseback riding from a young age, displaying tremendous bravery even as a child. At just 10 years old, he famously tamed the untamable horse Bucephalus, a massive stallion that no man could control. While his father and courtiers looked on in disbelief, Alexander observed that the horse was merely afraid of its own shadow. He turned the beast toward the sun and wrote it into legend. Philip, astounded, turned to his nobles and declared, "Macedonia is too small for you, my son. Seek a kingdom worthy of your ambition." Family tensions and royal politics. Despite Philip's admiration, the relationship between father and son was often strained. Philip's multiple marriages, particularly to Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian noblewoman, threatened Alexander's position as heir. Olympias, fiercely protective of her son, clashed bitterly with Philip's court. At times, Alexander's future appeared uncertain. He was exiled briefly after a quarrel with his father, but returned in time to prove his loyalty and capability. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE under mysterious circumstances, Alexander ascended to the throne at the age of 20. Some whispered that Olympias had a hand in the king's death, seeking to clear the path for her son. Whether true or not, Alexander wasted no time securing his claim. Within weeks he had crushed dissent, eliminated rival claimants, and been proclaimed King of Macedonia. He had been groomed for greatness since birth. Now the world would bear witness to what that greatness would become. The throne of fire. Alexander becomes king. When Alexander assumed the throne at the tender age of 20, the kingdom of Macedonia stood at a crossroads. His father, Philip II, had laid the groundwork for a grand campaign against the Persian Empire, assembling alliances through marriage, intimidation, and military dominance. But Philip's sudden assassination threatened to undo everything. The court buzzed with rumors. The air was thick with danger. Though young, Alexander acted with cold precision. He moved swiftly to eliminate threats. Within days, those who had conspired against his father or might were executed. Cleopatra Eurydice, Philip's last wife, and her infant were killed under mysterious circumstances, likely at the urging of Olympias, who now wielded influence through her son. But blood was not the only currency Alexander used. He also displayed political wisdom. He gained the loyalty of the Macedonian nobles and army, two pillars upon which his power would rest. The army, long familiar with Alexander's brilliance from past battles under Philip's command, accepted him not just as king, but as their general. Unrest in the north and the test of strength. Before Alexander could look east toward Persia, he had to deal with trouble at home. The Greek city-states, especially Thebes and Athens, viewed Philip's death as an opportunity to break free from Macedonian dominance. Rebellion stirred. In 335 BCE, Alexander marched south into Greece, where he demanded allegiance from the League of Corinth, the political alliance Philip had forged. Most cities submitted, but not Thebes. Thebes had risen in open revolt. Alexander's response was merciless. In a lightning-fast campaign, he surrounded Thebes and, after a brutal siege, destroyed the city. Over 6,000 Thebans were killed. 30,000 were enslaved. The city, once a major power in Greece, was reduced to rubble. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The message was clear. Alexander was king not just in name, but in action. Greece would not forget it. Egypt, Persia, and a greater dream. Even as he secured his base, Alexander's mind stretched eastward. He would finish his father's mission and surpass it. But unlike Philip, who may have aimed merely to punish Persia for its ancient wars with Greece, Alexander envisioned something greater, the unification of East and West under his leadership. He saw himself as a world ruler in the making, a man of divine purpose. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, into Asia Minor with an army of around 40,000 men, a daring move for a young king. As he stepped onto Asian soil, he reportedly threw a spear into the ground, declaring it land won by the sword. Thus began one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in history. The Hellenistic flame ignites. Though still in the earliest days of his reign, Alexander had already begun crafting a legend that would echo across the centuries. In barely 2 years since Philip's death, he had secured his throne, crushed rebellion in Thebes, gained the submission of Greece, built an army of veterans and loyal followers, launched a campaign into Asia against the mightiest empire of the known world. And yet, Alexander was only just beginning. He had been born in lightning, raised in fire, and sharpened by philosophy and war. Now, with eyes burning with ambition, he turned toward the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a vast domain that had humbled kings and swallowed armies. But Alexander was no ordinary king. He was a force of history in motion. Chapter 2. The Persian Campaigns, crossing the Hellespont to conquer an empire. There is nothing impossible to him who will try. Alexander the Great. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander the Great stood at the edge of Europe, gazing eastward across the narrow strait known as the Hellespont, the ancient boundary between two worlds. On the far side lay Asia Minor, the threshold of the mighty Persian Empire, ruled by King Darius III of the Achaemenid dynasty. With roughly 40,000 troops, including 12,000 Macedonian heavy infantry known as the Phalangites, 7,000 Greek hoplites, a cavalry force of about 5,000, and a fleet of support vessels, Alexander began the campaign that would make him a living legend. As his army crossed the Hellespont, Alexander performed a symbolic gesture. He cast a spear into the ground and declared Asia as won by the sword. He also made a pilgrimage to the legendary city of Troy, honoring the tombs of Achilles and Patroclus, laying wreaths and staging athletic contests to pay homage to the heroes of Homer. To Alexander, this campaign was not merely political, it was epic, a reenactment and fulfillment of mythic destiny. The Battle of the Granicus, Baptism of Fire. The first challenge came quickly. Just days after crossing into Asia, Alexander encountered the Persian satraps, governors, of Asia Minor at the river Granicus. Persian cavalry and Greek mercenaries had gathered in force, confident that they could drive back the invading Macedonians. Alexander's generals advised caution. The riverbanks were steep, the current strong, and the enemy entrenched. But Alexander would not delay. He saw hesitation as weakness and ordered a direct assault across the river. With his companion cavalry leading the charge, Alexander personally spearheaded the attack. His helmet plume marked him on the battlefield, and more than once Persian warriors tried to cut him down. In one dramatic moment, a Persian noble raised a sword to Alexander's head but was cut down by Clitus the Black, one of Alexander's trusted commanders. The battle ended in a resounding Macedonian victory. Thousands of Persians were slain. The Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia were either killed or enslaved. Alexander saw them as traitors to the Hellenic cause. The Battle of the Granicus served two purposes. It demonstrated Alexander's bravery and leadership. It shattered Persian morale and sent a clear message. The gods were with Alexander. The march through Asia Minor. After Granicus, Alexander proceeded through Asia Minor like a thunderstorm. Cities fell before him, some through siege, others through surrender. He treated those who submitted with mercy, but punished resistance harshly. His reputation grew with every step. One of the most legendary episodes during this period was the cutting of the Gordian knot. At the city of Gordium, Alexander was shown an ancient ox cart tied with a knot so complex that legend said whoever unraveled it would become ruler of Asia. Alexander examined the knot and then drew his sword and sliced it in half. Whether literal or symbolic, the event cemented Alexander's image as a man who created solutions through action, not delay. Enter Darius III. Alarmed by Alexander's progress, King Darius III of Persia began to take the threat seriously. Until now, he had underestimated the young Macedonian. But as the satrapies fell and Alexander approached the heartlands of the empire, Darius mobilized an enormous army to meet him. The two forces would soon clash at Issus, one of the most consequential battles in ancient history. But before that, Alexander had to consolidate control, win over cities, and manage a logistical miracle. He moved thousands of soldiers, horses, and supplies across vast distances with speed and efficiency unmatched by his contemporaries. His understanding of terrain, climate, and timing proved extraordinary. He also cultivated loyalty among conquered peoples. Alexander spared temples, honored local deities, and allowed certain cities self-rule policies that would later form the basis of his vision for a unified empire. The Battle of Issus, Clash of Kings. In 333 BCE, as Alexander advanced into Cilicia, he found himself cut off from his supply lines by an unexpected maneuver. Darius III had marched a massive Persian force north and now stood behind Alexander, cutting off the coast and trapping the Macedonian army between the mountains and the sea. Though vastly outnumbered, Alexander seized the initiative. The site of their encounter was the narrow plains of Issus, where the Persian army's numerical superiority, estimated at over 250,000 troops compared to Alexander's 40,000, was neutralized by the terrain. The river Panaris ran across the battlefield, and Alexander positioned his phalanx in the center, with cavalry units anchoring each flank. Darius, confident of an overwhelming victory, watched from his elaborate royal chariot. But numbers alone do not win wars. Alexander had discipline, strategy, and momentum on his side. As the battle began, Alexander led the companion cavalry in a thunderous charge against the Persian left flank. He personally sought out Darius, pushing deep into the enemy formation. Panic spread through the Persian ranks as Alexander's troops broke their lines. Darius, seeing the situation deteriorate, abandoned his chariot and fled the battlefield on horseback, leaving behind his army, his treasury, and his family. The captured queen and Alexander's honor among the spoils of war was Darius's family, his mother Sisygambis, his wife, and his daughters. In a gesture that would define his legacy, Alexander treated them with respect and dignity. Rather than enslaving or humiliating them, he offered comfort and protection. When Sisygambis mistakenly bowed to Alexander's friend Hephaestion, thinking he was the king, Alexander gently corrected her and declared, "He too is Alexander." Such moments revealed a side of Alexander that was more than warrior. He was also statesman, idealist, and visionary, one who sought not just victory, but admiration and legitimacy from those he conquered. Darius's offers and Alexander's refusal. In the aftermath of Issus, Darius sent envoys with peace offers. He proposed a generous ransom for his family, ceded lands west of the Euphrates, and offered his daughter's hand in marriage. But Alexander refused. As far as he was concerned, he was now king of Asia. It was not land or money he sought, but the complete overthrow of the Persian monarchy. He famously told Darius's envoys, "Tell your king that the earth can no longer bear two sons." The stage was now set for the next chapter, the conquest of the eastern Mediterranean and the legendary march into Egypt. But before that, Alexander would face resistance along the coastal cities of Phoenicia, particularly in Tyre, a city that would test his ingenuity and patience like no other. Chapter 3. Siege of Tyre and the Conquest of Egypt. I am not merely king of Macedonia, I am lord of the world. Alexander the Great. After his decisive victory at Issus, Alexander the Great did not immediately pursue Darius III. Instead, he turned his attention westward, seeking to control the eastern Mediterranean coast. His objective was strategic. By securing the Phoenician ports, Alexander would deny Persia its naval power and prevent the Persian fleet from threatening his rear. The jewel of the sea? Tyre. Among the coastal cities, most surrendered without much resistance. Byblos, Sidon, and Arwad capitulated, acknowledging Alexander's power. But Tyre, a wealthy and proud city built on an island off the coast of modern-day Lebanon, refused. Tyre was more than a port. It was a symbol of Phoenician independence, an ancient and well-fortified city that had withstood numerous sieges in its long history. Its citizens would not bow to any king easily, not even Alexander. When the Macedonian army arrived, the Tyrians refused him entry. Alexander, however, was determined to bring the city under his control. Thus began the legendary Siege of Tyre, one of the greatest engineering and military feats of antiquity. Building a road to conquest, Tyre's strength lay in its isolation. Situated about half a mile offshore, it was surrounded by water and protected by massive walls up to 150 feet high. The city relied on its powerful navy and strong defenses to withstand invaders, but Alexander, never one to retreat, devised a bold plan. He would build a causeway, a land bridge from the mainland to the island. Under constant enemy fire, Alexander's men labored for 7 months, driving pilings, hauling stones, and building a massive mole stretching across the water. The Tyrians responded with naval raids, fire ships, and artillery from the walls. Progress was slow, casualties high, and morale was tested. To counter Tyre's navy, Alexander enlisted the surrendered Phoenician fleets from Sidon and Byblos, and constructed siege towers floating artillery platforms that moved along the causeway. Eventually, Alexander's combined land-sea assault breached Tyre's defenses. His forces stormed the city in 332 BCE, overwhelming its defenders. Tyre's fall was brutal. Around 8,000 Tyrians were killed in battle, and 30,000 were enslaved. Alexander's fury was fueled by the long resistance and the loss of many of his own men. But the world had received another message. No city was beyond the reach of Alexander's ambition. A Pharaoh's welcome. The conquest of Egypt. With the Levant secured, Alexander turned south toward Egypt, a rich and ancient land under nominal Persian rule. The Egyptians, long resentful of their Persian overlords, welcomed Alexander not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In late 332 BCE, he entered Memphis to thunderous applause. Priests and nobles hailed him, and ceremonies were held in his honor. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Egypt and visited temples across the land. In a move that would solidify his legacy, Alexander traveled to the Siwa oasis in the Libyan desert to consult the oracle of Ammon, believed to be the same oracle that had guided pharaohs. There, in whispers lost to time, the oracle allegedly declared Alexander the son of Zeus Ammon, a divine title that Alexander embraced fully. From this point onward, he considered himself not just a king, but a demigod, chosen to rule the world. Founding of Alexandria. Before leaving Egypt, Alexander founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. Planned with Greek architectural precision, Alexandria would become one of the most important cultural and economic centers of the ancient world. It would house the Great Library, the Pharos Lighthouse, and a melting pot of Greek and Egyptian civilization. Alexander never lived to see the city completed, but its very existence was a symbol of his vision, a fusion of East and West, science and culture, royalty and philosophy. Chapter 4. The Battle of Gaugamela, the Fall of the Persian Empire. A tomb now suffices him for whom the whole world was not sufficient. Alexander's epitaph. After consolidating Egypt and founding the city of Alexandria, Alexander the Great turned his focus once more to the east. The time had come for his final confrontation with Darius III, the king who had fled twice before at Issus and during the coastal campaigns. The Persian Empire, though still vast, was beginning to fracture under the weight of Alexander's relentless advance. But Darius would not go quietly. He assembled the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. Prelude to the clash, the site of the showdown was the plains of Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul, Iraq, in 331 BCE. Darius chose the location deliberately. It was flat and expansive, ideal for his cavalry and chariot forces. He even had the battlefield leveled and cleared of obstacles to accommodate his elite scythed chariots, designed to rip through enemy formations. Estimates vary, but Darius likely commanded over 250,000 men, including heavy and light cavalry from Bactria and Scythia, Persian immortals, and royal guards. thousands of war chariots with scythe wheels, 15 Indian war elephants, Greek mercenaries and local auxiliaries. Alexander's force, just 47,000 strong, outnumbered more than 5 to 1, facing a perfectly prepared battlefield, and yet he remained calm. He studied the terrain. He inspired his men. He prayed to the gods. And then he made his move. The night before the battle, Darius's camp was lit with torches, drums, and noise, a display of power designed to intimidate. Alexander's camp was silent. His men rested. He told his generals, "I do not steal victory in the night. We fight in the light of day." He awoke early, led sacrifices, and dressed in brilliant armor. Atop his horse, Bucephalus, Alexander rode along the ranks. He wasn't just a commander, he was a symbol of divine fury and destiny. Battle begins. Darius began with a full-force frontal assault, sending chariots and cavalry forward. Alexander, anticipating this, had created corridors in his phalanx. His men parted like gates, allowing chariots to pass harmlessly through. Archers and javelin men picked them off with precision. Alexander then executed his trademark oblique formation. He shifted his right flank forward, drawing the Persians to overextend. When the moment came, he led the companion cavalry in a thunderous charge straight at Darius' position. Once again, the Persian king fled. This time, the Persian Empire fell with him. The Macedonian army captured Darius's war chariot, personal weapons, and royal insignia. The enemy army collapsed in panic, and Alexander's forces pursued the remnants for miles. Aftermath and the end of an empire. Following the victory at Gaugamela, Alexander marched triumphantly into Babylon, one of the richest cities in the world. There, he was welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a king of kings. He continued eastward to Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana, where the treasures of Persia lay gold, silver, jewels, and silk beyond imagination. He distributed massive rewards to his troops and began planning for the next phase of his vision, not just military conquest, but cultural unification. Meanwhile, Darius III, now abandoned by his generals, was betrayed and mortally wounded by Bessus, one of his own satraps. Alexander would later find Darius dead in a cart, having been left to bleed alone. Alexander wept. He covered Darius's body with his royal cloak and gave him a funeral worthy of a king. To Alexander, Darius had not only been an enemy, but the last great obstacle to destiny. Chapter 5. From King to God. The transformation of Alexander. Do I not deserve to be called the son of Zeus when I have conquered the world? Alexander the Great. The death of Darius III marked more than the end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. It marked a profound transformation in Alexander himself. No longer simply a Macedonian king or a Greek general, Alexander began to reinvent himself as the legitimate world ruler, heir to Persia, son of divinity, and leader of a new global vision. His evolution would define the final chapters of his life and deeply affect the future of the world. The royal honors of Babylon and Susa. In Babylon, Alexander was welcomed with pomp, reverence, and gold. The city was decorated in celebration, and its people offered gifts, temples, and titles. Alexander allowed the native priesthood to continue their rituals, signaling his respect for local culture. His approach was strategic. Rather than ruling as a foreign invader, he posed as a liberator and chosen monarch. At Susa, he entered the palace of the former Persian kings and gazed upon the greatest treasury the world had ever known. Some estimates suggest over 180,000 talents of silver were found equivalent to billions of modern dollars. Instead of hoarding it, Alexander paid off his soldiers' debts, gave lavish bonuses, and ordered massive cultural and architectural projects. The capital of Persepolis, however, would not be spared. The burning of Persepolis, a symbolic act. In the spring of 330 BCE, Alexander arrived in Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire. Though welcomed cautiously, the city's deep loyalty to the Achaemenid dynasty was known. Perhaps seeking revenge for the Persian sack of Athens 150 years earlier, or perhaps in a drunken display of symbolic dominance, Alexander allowed the city to be burned. Flames engulfed palaces, halls, and libraries. The fire consumed art, history, and legacy. Regret would follow. Alexander reportedly wept the next morning, realizing what he had destroyed. It was a turning point. From here on, he sought not vengeance, but integration. Persian customs and the divinity debate. Alexander began to adopt Persian dress, sat upon a golden throne, and surrounded himself with Persian advisors and eunuchs. He demanded that Greeks and Macedonians perform proskynesis, the Persian act of bowing or prostration before royalty. This enraged many of his countrymen. In Greek tradition, such gestures were reserved for gods, not mortals. Alexander, however, believed he had transcended mortality. He had been declared son of Amun by the oracle of Siwa and increasingly saw himself as a living deity, a bridge between human and divine. His inner circle, including Callisthenes, the historian and nephew of Aristotle, resisted these changes. Callisthenes would later be accused of conspiracy and executed. The old world of Greece was fading. Alexander's new vision was imperial, divine, and Eastern. The marriages, symbolic and strategic. To consolidate his empire, Alexander married Roxana, a noblewoman from Bactria, modern Afghanistan, in 327 BCE. It was not a political alliance alone, it was a love match, according to many sources. Roxana was beautiful, spirited, and became pregnant with his child. Later, in 324 BCE, Alexander arranged a mass wedding ceremony in Susa, where he and over 90 of his generals married Persian noblewomen. He hoped to create a blended aristocracy, binding Macedonians and Persians in blood. But not all accepted this new vision. Many Macedonians felt alienated. His adoption of Persian court etiquette and divine honors fueled dissent. Alexander was no longer merely the son of Philip. He was becoming the ruler of all men by force, marriage, culture, and belief. Chapter 6. The March East, India, Rebellion, and the Cost of Empire. There are no more worlds to conquer. Words attributed to Alexander after subduing the known world. By 327 BCE, Alexander the Great had accomplished what no Greek, Persian, or Egyptian ruler ever had. He had unified a colossal empire stretching from the Aegean Sea to the borders of India. Yet the flame of conquest still burned within him. He now turned his attention to the mysterious and fabled lands of the East, what lay beyond the Persian Empire, India. Into the land of the Indus. Alexander's campaign into India began with crossing the formidable Hindu Kush Mountains, a treacherous, snow-covered range that tested the limits of his army's endurance. Thousands of men, horses, and pack animals perished in the crossing. Yet Alexander pushed on, determined to subdue the lands beyond. In Bactria and Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, Alexander spent over 2 years quelling rebellions and building new cities. This campaign, known as the Sogdian Revolt, marked a shift in tone. The fighting was not against vast empires, but against guerrilla resistance and betrayal. It was brutal, personal, and exhausting. It was also during this time that Alexander married Roxana, daughter of the Bactrian noble Oxyartes, after capturing the fortress of Sogdian Rock, a dramatic stronghold high in the mountains. This marriage was both a romantic union and a symbol of unification between Greek and Eastern cultures. The Hydaspes battle against King Porus. In 326 BCE, after reaching the Indus River Valley, Alexander faced his most famous Indian opponent, King Porus of the Parava kingdom, a fierce and noble warrior. Their armies met at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, modern Jhelum River in Pakistan. Porus's forces included a terrifying weapon unknown to the Macedonians' war elephants. Over 200 of them, armored and trained to trample infantry, stood like living fortresses on the battlefield. The battle began during a monsoon storm, with Alexander using his now familiar tactic, feints and flanking. While Porus anticipated a frontal crossing, Alexander secretly led a contingent of cavalry across the river upstream and attacked the Indian army from the rear. The battle was ferocious. War elephants trampled men on both sides. The Macedonian phalanx, normally unshakable, had to adapt to moving mountains of flesh and ivory. But Alexander's tactical brilliance and his troops' discipline carried the day. Porus, wounded but still proud, refused to flee. When captured and brought before Alexander, he was asked how he wished to be treated. Porus replied, "Like a king." Impressed by his courage, Alexander not only spared Porus, but made him a satrap, ruling even more land than before. It was a moment that defined Alexander's approach. He rewarded valor, loyalty, and nobility, even in defeated enemies. Mutiny at the Hyphasis. After the victory, Alexander intended to march further east, toward the Ganges River, where even greater kingdoms were rumored to lie. But at the Hyphasis River, modern-day Bees, his soldiers refused to go further. Worn by years of battle, longing for home, and fearful of the vast unknown, they mutinied. Even Alexander's most trusted generals, including Coenus, pleaded with him to turn back. Furious and heartbroken, Alexander withdrew to his tent for days. Eventually, he emerged and declared his decision. They would return westward, but not by the easy road. Alexander chose to divide the army. Some would go by sea with Nearchus. The rest would follow him through the Gedrosian desert, a decision that would prove nearly fatal. Chapter 7. The March Back, Desert Hell and Internal Fractures. He led an army across the world, but could not lead them home without blood and tears. Ancient commentary on Alexander's return. Having reached the edge of the known world at the Hyphasis River, Alexander the Great made the painful decision to turn back. But in characteristic fashion, he chose the most grueling and daring route possible. He would lead his troops through the Gedrosian Desert, part of modern-day southern Iran and Pakistan, one of the most unforgiving regions on earth. The burning sands of Gedrosia. The Gedrosian Desert, also known as the Makran Desert, was a desolate inferno. Alexander was warned by locals, advisors, and his own generals to avoid it. Yet he was determined to show the world, and perhaps himself, that he could overcome nature just as he had empires. The campaign became a trial by fire. Temperatures soared beyond human tolerance. Water was scarce. Many soldiers and animals died of thirst. Sandstorms blinded and disoriented entire columns. Supply lines failed, and food dwindled to scraps. Alexander, unlike some later rulers, suffered alongside his men. He refused water when others had none. He walked, sunburnt and parched, beside his infantry. The image of the great conqueror, once draped in silk and gold, became one of shared agony and stubborn resolve. Yet the desert did what no army could. It broke his forces. Thousands perished. Camels collapsed. Officers questioned his judgment, and morale hit its lowest point. Still, Alexander pressed forward. By the time they emerged near Hormuz on the Persian Gulf, what was left of the once glorious army was a shadow of its former self. Yet those who survived were hardened legends, men who had walked through hell behind a king who never turned back. Rebuilding in Susa and the return to Babylon, after the desert ordeal, Alexander rejoined his admiral Nearchus, who had successfully navigated the Indian Ocean coast and brought the fleet to safe harbor. Together, they journeyed to Susa, where Alexander sought to reintegrate his empire. He held a second Susa wedding ceremony, reaffirming marriages between Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen. He also appointed both Greek and Persian satraps, continuing his vision of a blended elite. But the tensions were mounting. Many Macedonians resented the Persianization of their king. They saw themselves being replaced in governance and culture. Proskynesis, Persian attire, and divine honors felt alien, even offensive. The dream of a unified empire was becoming a fractured illusion. In an attempt to soothe tensions, Alexander ordered the discharge of old, wounded Macedonian veterans, but when they misunderstood the move as rejection, they mutinied at Opus. For the first time, Alexander confronted a full-scale rebellion among his own men. He isolated himself for days, reportedly weeping and refusing to speak. Eventually, he appeared and gave a powerful, emotional speech. "I have led you to glory. I have shared your hardships. I have made you masters of the world. But if my presence offends you, then go. Return to your homes. I shall find others to fight beside me." Stunned and guilt-ridden, the soldiers begged forgiveness. Alexander relented and reconciled, but he now saw clearly. Even his own people could not fully grasp the empire he was building. Chapter 8. Babylon, the final vision, and a sudden death. A tomb now suffices him, for whom the world was not enough. Epitaph for Alexander the Great. The empire stretched from the Ionian Sea to the Indus River, uniting dozens of nations, tongues, and traditions under a single banner. But the man who had built it, Alexander the Great, was now only 32 years old, and something had changed within him. He returned to Babylon in 324 BCE, not as a warrior, but as an emperor, a philosopher-king, and a man haunted by the scale of his accomplishments and the limits of his mortality. Reorganizing the empire. In Babylon, Alexander began what historians now call his final great campaign, not of war, but of administration and vision. His dream was to solidify a truly global empire, where East and West would not just coexist, but blend into something greater. He began recruiting Persian youth into the army and training them in the Macedonian style, replacing disloyal satraps with trusted commanders of mixed heritage, planning the construction of vast road networks, canals, and harbors, drawing up plans for a worldwide trade system from Arabia to North Africa to India. He even began preparations for a grand Arabian campaign, intended not for conquest, but for exploration and integration. A sudden illness. In the 3rd of June 23 BCE, after a night of celebration and drinking, Alexander collapsed with a high fever. Some said it followed a banquet at the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. Others said it was after a heavy sacrifice to the gods. What began as exhaustion quickly turned into paralysis. He could no longer speak. Over 12 agonizing days, he drifted in and out of consciousness, surrounded by his generals, wives, and priests. Despite rumors, there is no consensus on what killed him. Theories include malaria or typhoid fever, autoimmune disorders, poisoning, possibly by political rivals, even West Nile virus, according to modern medical speculation. But what is clear is that he died suddenly, without naming a clear successor. To the strongest. As he lay on his deathbed, his generals crowded around him and asked, "To whom do you leave the empire?" His whispered reply, according to legend, "To the strongest." These 3 words would set the stage for a century of civil wars, bloodshed, and the ultimate division of his empire among competing successors, the Diadochi. Alexander died on the 10th of June, or 323 BCE, in Babylon. He was 32. The man who had conquered the world was gone. But the consequences of his life were only beginning. Chapter 9. The Empty Throne, the Wars of the Successors. An empire built on a single man crumbled the moment he was no more. Ancient reflection on the Diadochi Wars. With the death of Alexander in Babylon in 323 BCE, the known world reeled in disbelief. The master of Asia, son of Zeus Ammon, and unifier of East and West, had left behind no adult heir and no clear plan for succession. All he had left behind was a baby Alexander IV, his unborn son with Roxana, and a brother, Arrhidaeus, mentally impaired and unfit to rule alone. In the absence of order, chaos reigned, the funeral and the disputed body. Before any decisions could be made about rulership, one question tore open the fragile unity Alexander had forged. Where should he be buried? Alexander had expressed a wish to be interred at the oracle of Zeus Ammon in Siwa, the place where he was declared divine. But tradition and politics disagreed. Perdiccas, one of his closest commanders, took charge as regent for the infant Alexander IV and Roxana, who was now pregnant. Perdiccas planned to bury the king in Macedonia, in the royal tombs of his ancestors. However, Ptolemy, another of Alexander's top generals and future ruler of Egypt, had other ideas. He intercepted the funeral procession and brought Alexander's body to Memphis, then later to Alexandria, where it would lie in a golden sarcophagus, drawing pilgrims and rulers for centuries. Even in death, Alexander's body became a symbol of power. Whoever held it claimed legitimacy. Division of the empire, the partition of Babylon. In a tense meeting following Alexander's death, the generals divided the empire through the partition of Babylon. They agreed to rule as satraps, governors in Alexander's name, waiting for the birth of his child. But peace was short-lived. Here were some of the key players in the coming chaos. Perdiccas, appointed regent, attempted to preserve unity but faced dissent. Ptolemy took Egypt, acted independently, stole the body of Alexander. Antipater took control of Macedon and Greece. Seleucus assigned Babylon, but ambitions burned bright. Antigonus placed in charge of Phrygia and sought dominance. Cassander, son of Antipater, ruthless and ambitious. Eumenes, a loyal general to Alexander, defender of the royal house. What began as administration in Alexander's name would soon turn into open warfare. Chapter 10. The Legacy That Shaped a World. The empire vanished, but his name endured. By 300 BCE, less than a quarter century after Alexander's death, the unified empire he built had fractured into multiple Hellenistic kingdoms. The wars of the Diadochi had transformed comrades into enemies, and the dream of a single universal monarchy had died with him. Yet, Alexander's legacy was far from gone. In fact, it had just begun to reshape the world. The Hellenistic kingdoms, the former generals carved out realms that came to be known as the Hellenistic kingdoms. Ptolemaic Egypt. Ruled by Ptolemy I, this dynasty lasted nearly 300 years, ending with Cleopatra VII. Alexandria became a cultural jewel of the Mediterranean. Seleucid Empire. Founded by Seleucus I Nicator, it stretched from Syria to the borders of India and preserved much of Alexander's eastern empire. Antigonid Macedonia controlled much of Greece and the homeland of the Macedonians. Pergamon, Bactria, and other Hellenistic states emerged in Asia Minor and Central Asia. In these kingdoms, Greek language, art, architecture, science, and philosophy spread, blending with local customs to form a hybrid civilization. The Alexandrias. Of the more than 20 cities named Alexandria, founded by Alexander, the most famous Alexandria in Egypt became a beacon of knowledge, home to the legendary Library of Alexandria, the Pharos Lighthouse, and a melting pot of cultures. These cities served not just as military outposts, but hubs of commerce, learning, and diplomacy. The spread of Hellenism. Alexander's campaigns initiated a profound cultural revolution known as Hellenization, the spread of Greek culture and institutions far beyond the Aegean world. Impacts included: Koine Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean. Greek philosophy influenced Jewish, Persian, and later Islamic thinkers. Greek medicine, astronomy, and mathematics flourished in new schools. Art and sculpture reflected a fusion of Eastern and Western styles. Religious syncretism blended Greek gods with local deities. Even after Rome rose to power, its civilization owed much to the Hellenistic foundations laid in the wake of Alexander's conquests. Chapter 11. Myths, Memory, and the Immortal Alexander. He lived only 32 years, but in death he conquered eternity. Alexander's physical empire may have disintegrated, but in myth he grew even larger. Few individuals in history have inspired so many legends, impersonations, and political appropriations as Alexander the Great. Alexander in myth and legend. In Greece and Rome, Alexander was revered as the greatest military genius ever. Julius Caesar wept in Spain, lamenting that by his age, Alexander had conquered the world. In Persia, despite being a conqueror, he became Iskandar the Two-Horned, a wise and just king in Islamic tradition, echoing the dual Karnain figure of the Quran. In India, he appeared in both Hindu and Buddhist chronicles as a powerful foreign king, remembered for his discipline and ambition. In Ethiopia and the Arab world, a vast corpus called the Alexander Romance painted him as a heroic adventurer, traveling to the ends of the earth, even to the bottom of the sea and into the heavens. In medieval Europe, Christian and Jewish writers imagined him battling monsters, building the gates of Gog and Magog, and speaking prophecies before his death. This mythical Alexander became a symbol of curiosity, ambition, and fate, a man who defied the gods, touched every continent, and sought immortality in action. Political appropriations. Napoleon Bonaparte openly modeled himself on Alexander, admiring his direct command style and personal charisma. Adolf Hitler referenced Alexander's swift conquests and racial fusion, albeit twisted through ideology. Modern Greece and Macedonia still debate his legacy and name, a testament to the lasting power of his identity. Alexander became a blank canvas onto which kings, emperors, scholars, and artists projected their ideals. The search for the tomb. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is the fate of Alexander's body. We know that Ptolemy brought it to Memphis, then Alexandria. Roman emperors like Augustus and Caligula visited the tomb. Julius Caesar paid homage to it, but by the 4th century A.D., it disappeared. Some believe it was destroyed during Christian riots. Others think it was hidden. Some fringe theories claim his remains are buried beneath modern Alexandria or even the Grand Mosque of Alexandria. To this day, archaeologists and adventurers search for the tomb, hoping to uncover the last trace of the man who ruled the world. Final reflections. He came like a thunderstorm, he left like a god, and the world was never the same. Alexander's life was brief but titanic. In just 12 years, he conquered the greatest empires of his day, united cultures from Greece to India, blended East and West in a bold new vision, sparked a golden age of science, trade, and learning, inspired myth-makers, generals, and dreamers for millennia. His flaws, pride, rage, recklessness only humanized him further. But it is his ambition, vision, and courage that continue to echo across centuries. He was not merely a king or conqueror, he was the incarnation of ambition itself. Alexander the Great did not just change the map, he changed the course of human history.